Hey, what's up, free thinklings? Welcome to a theological dust-up hosted by FreeThinking Ministries. I'm Dr. Tim Stratton, and with me today is none other than the other Timothy. That's Timothy Orthodox Fox, but I just like to call him the Fox Man. Hey, there he is.
What's up?
What's going on, Fox?
Nothing much.
Welcome to the show. Hey, let me tell everybody about Timothy Fox. You know, the Fox Man and I, we've been close friends since we met back at Biola in 2012. And we realized that we had just about everything in common, from Star Wars to comic books and superheroes to martial arts and music to our bald heads, and especially apologetics and theology. Now, Tim Fox is a regular blogger at freethinkingministries.com. Make sure you check out his stuff there. But now you can count on him being a regular part of this FTM show here on YouTube.
That's
we tend to go live on a regular basis, so stay tuned. But hey, speaking of this channel, we need a cool name for this show. So, feel free to give us your best suggestions in the comments about what we should call this thing. And also, since I'm on YouTube now, I got to say this: make sure to smash that like button and don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring that bell. Anyway, Foxman, welcome to the show. In fact, you know what? Why don't you just kind of take the reins today, lead this discussion today? Why don't you interview me? How's that sound?
All right. It sounds good. Sounds good. Hey, first off, you've had a busy week. Tuesday night, you did a Zoom favor for me to teach the free thinking argument to the apologetics class that I lead in conjunction with New York Apologetics. So shout out to Nick, Anthony, and JD. Yeah. Monday morning, you were on the Cross-Examine live show with Jorge Gil. Tell us about that.
I will, but I got to say something first. What's up with the wood paneling in the back?
Fox ain't fancy, all right? Fox ain't fancy. All right.
I thought New Yorkers were fans, but I guess it's us Nebraskans that are the.
Yeah. We're not all posh, all right? We're not all, Hamptonites.
Well, anyway, speaking of that conversation with Jorge, that was a lot of fun. And actually, it was related to some of the things that we're going to discuss today. The topic of conversation on it's Frank Turek's show and related to Cross-Examine. It's called Hope One. The topic of conversation was basically how an understanding of God's sovereignty can bring hope and peace. And I was able to show how libertarian free will, libertarian freedom can be used to answer all the problems of evil, not just moral evil, but also natural evil. Contrary to popular opinion, you can appeal to libertarian freedom to answer all the problems of evil, at least when you combine libertarian freedom with something called divine middle knowledge, which, that gets us mere Molinism. But anyway, we'll get into that topic later, but it was a lot of fun. I encourage people to go to our YouTube channel, and you can find that video there. I think it's called Hope Through Sovereignty, or Hope Through God's Sovereignty.
All right, very good. Right now, shout out to Adam Coleman from True ID Apologetics. He just sent us a shout out. Nice. I'm probably going to be distracted with all these comments. So this is my first time. Please bear with me. Be kind in the comments. All right.
It was Adam's birthday yesterday. So happy birthday, Adam.
Happy birthday. And today is my dad's birthday. So happy birthday to my dad. I don't know if he'll be watching, but happy birthday, Dad. All right. So talking about
Fox. Yes. Most importantly, I believe today is the birthday of one of the best movies of all time, The Empire Strikes Back.
Oh my goodness, how could we forget that? Happy 40th birthday. Yes, 40, right? Yeah, 40. That is very true. Yeah, Star Wars, that was one of the things we have in common, Star Wars. Right. Mm-hmm. All right, so let's get back to your talk with Jorge on Cross-Examine. You can find this on our YouTube channel, so make sure you watch it. And then again, this live stream of ours is going to be a regular thing, right?
Yeah, man, I plan on doing live streaming now on a regular basis. Hopefully it turns into something we do weekly. So yeah, please make sure you subscribe and stay tuned.
And add your comments as we go. Please make sure that you're getting your comments, your questions. We have a lot to go through, so we're going to do our best. We'll see if we can get to those questions. If not now, well, then you'll have to join us at another time.
Yeah. All right, now, if we don't get to your comments or questions today, Fox and I will look at them and we'll do another video. If they're good, we'll do a whole video devoted to your comments. So yeah, please share them.
All right. Now, one thing I have to say, just because Stratton and I are tag team partners, right? We're ministry partners, doesn't mean I'm going to take it easy on him. Just the opposite. Because I believe, Stratton, you've called me in the past a disagreeable New Yorker.
Yeah, that's right. I think I've called you something like that, you know.
Hey, I'll own it. I'll own it. Because you know what? I mean, look, the Bible does talk about ironing, sharpening iron, you know, not mud sharpening Play-Doh. So we're not going to pull any punches here.
Okay, well, bring it on, dude. You know that I used to be an MMA fighter, and yes. I'd get mad. I'd get mad at my sparring partners, you know, my brothers who I loved. You know, I would get mad at these guys if they'd take it easy on me. And I wouldn't go easy on them. You know why? Because I wanted to prepare them for reality, and I wanted them to do the same thing for me. I wanted them to prepare me in return. So, hey, that's what friends do. That's what friends are for. So, hey, take your best shot, Fox.
All right. So this all started. You've been in this 3-on-1 match with Leighton Flowers, Braxton Hunter. What do you call them?
Guns N' Roses, baby.
Leighton Flowers, Braxton Hunter, and you. So you were against Guillaume Bignon. I hope I said that right. So he's famously known as the French atheist turned Calvinist, which isn't really that much better, right, Tim? Just kidding. Just that's why I'm here. That's why I'm here. The comedic relief. All right. So before we start, though, okay, can you give us a brief recap of what we've got going on here? So this started. Bignon was a guest on the Revealed Apologetics show, which is hosted by Eli Ayala. Which, fun fact, Eli's the guy that got me into apologetics. So hey, thank you, Eli. Shout out to Eli. And I gotta say, Eli's the coolest Calvinist I know. Shout out to you, Eli. All right. So who drew the first blood, though? Was it the libertarian freedom fighters or the French fatalist?
I don't know if it's accurate to refer to Bignon as a fatalist.
You're the philosopher. You're the philosopher. I'm just the comedic.
Maybe he is a fatalist. I don't think. Look, I don't think all determinists are fatalists, but many are, and at least some are. We'd have to get some clarification from him. You know, it really. Now you got me thinking. I don't think that he affirmed that God has libertarian freedom, and so if he thinks that God has no ability to do or create otherwise, he might be a fatalist. I don't want to put words in his mouth. We'll have to ask him. But I'll tell you what, the alliteration is too good to avoid calling him the French fatalist. So, hey, if you want to call him that, that's fine with me. He might push back on that. But
we got some great comments coming in already. We're 7 minutes in. We already have some great comments and questions. Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. We'll do our best. We promise.
Okay. So you asked who drew first blood, right? Yes. That's debatable because the whole thing kind of started over a lunch in Rhode Island a couple of years ago that Bignon and I attended. We were with our mutual friends, you know, some of the other guys there. We had David Wood, John McCrae, you know, the what do you meme guy. Clay Jones was there, our former professor, Mary Jo Sharp, several others. And at the time, I had no idea who Guillaume Bignon was, but I happened to be sitting right next to him. He was on my right. I guess it was predestined.
Predestined, yeah.
Predestined. You know, I think God knew what he was doing. See, we both agree on exhaustive divine predestination, but we disagree how God predestines things. That's really where the focus of this debate is. But anyway, our mutual friends at the table made it clear, you know, that I was the libertarian freedom fighter and that he was the deterministic dictator. You know, I think he was the only determinist at the table. And so our mutual friends kind of encouraged a little mini debate there over lunch. One of them said, "Set them straight, Stratton." And so we started a conversation on the topic, and, you know, a couple small shots were fired, but we swept the debate under the rug because Bignon told me that his upcoming book would answer all of the objections, you know, at least the first couple of objections that I was raising at that table. And so I pre-ordered his book and waited eagerly for it to arrive. And I read it as soon as it was delivered, excuse me, as soon as it was delivered to my front door. Needless to say, well, I don't think his book met the challenges that I was raising over lunch. So I wrote a blog on our website, freethinkingministries.com. I just expressed my disappointment. And now Bignon finally then responded to my blog on Eli's show a couple years later, and also fired a few shots at Guns N' Roses at Leighton Flowers and Braxton Hunter. I guess it would be Hunter and Flowers to get your Guns N' Roses. But yeah, so he was taking shots at all three of us at once. So he picked a fight, theological dust up. He picked a fight with us three all at the same time. So here we are.
All right, here we are. So, I mean, I know you guys have recorded like hundreds and hundreds of hours, maybe not hundreds, but you guys have recorded a lot of material. There's been a lot of stuff written. We cannot possibly get to all of it. So we definitely recommend going back and listening to some of the past interviews and whatnot. But you know, if you can you just give us like a brief recap? I believe that you've included some of the videos in the description in case people want to go back and watch. Really quick snapshot before we get into it.
Yeah. Okay. Just to fly over this. So we had our lunch. Guillaume Bignon wrote his book. Hard to say for us Americans sometimes, but I have to remember that I have to remember filet mignon. If I can say that, then I can say Bignon. All right. So
and me, it's lasagna.
Yeah.
Forget about it.
So here's how it happened. We had the lunch. I read his book. I wrote a little blog. A couple years later,
a little blog. Yeah, Tim wrote a little blog.
I wrote a little blog. A couple years later, Bignon responded to that blog on Eli Ayala's show. Again, and he took shots at Guns N' Roses and me, and then the three of us recorded 3 videos. So first, Leighton Flowers had Braxton Hunter and I on his show, Soteriology 101. And the title of that was Determinism Refuted Biblically. Yeah, so make sure you watch that video. Then Braxton Hunter had Leighton Flowers and me on his show. And that's on Trinity Radio. So make sure you watch that. It's called Determinism Refuted Theologically. And then I hosted the 2 of them right here on this show, FreeThinking Ministries on the YouTube channel here. And that one was called Determinism Refuted Philosophically.
Okay.
Well, since Bignon is, he had to defend himself. And so he went back on after, we call this the trilogy of the trilogy of responses to Guillaume. And mine, the one that I hosted, was 3 hours long. So it was, and the other 2 were both 2 hours each. So he had 7 hours of stuff to respond to. And he responded to a few of the things. Not all, he didn't have time. He spent a couple hours with Eli. So he did part 2 with Eli. And that is what I want to focus on today. I want to laser focus on one specific thing today. And I want to address the other things later.
Right, yeah. Because I went through it, and he does raise a lot of great objections. We will get to them, just not today.
I would say they're great in a certain sense, but yes. I think we have even better answers.
Okay. Right. So the whole reason we're doing this, though, is because he goes after your baby, the free thinking argument against naturalism. He does say in his first discussion with Eli, so part 1, he says that if the free thinking argument against naturalism is sound, quote, it really hits the Calvinist hard, end quote. However, he does not think it's sound. And of course, we shouldn't accept every Christian argument just because it's a Christian argument. He says this, and you know what? I agree with it. If there are weaknesses in an argument, then we should either patch them up or throw them out. So, that said, the free thinking argument is your cornerstone argument. That's been the basis of everything you've been doing for the last 8 years. I even think I was in the same class as you when, the seeds were planted in your head. Yeah. So we need to know, is this argument flawed? And is it time for us to change the name of our ministry then?
No, definitely not. I actually think the argument is growing stronger because of this conversation. But that's right. You were sitting right next to me in Scott Smith's classroom at Biola. When I first started thinking about free thinking, Dr. Smith, he wasn't even talking about free will or determinism or anything, but he was discussing the philosophical concept of intentionality. And for those who haven't heard of that before, that's simply referring to the property of being of or about other things. And Dr. Smith was pointing out how that was a problem for naturalism. Well, with my ADD, it sparked some thoughts, and I started thinking about other things right there in the classroom. Like I said, he wasn't even talking about freedom or determinism, but it hit me that if something other than me always causally determines exactly what I think of and about and exactly how I think of and about it, so that we're talking about intentionality, what I think of and about and how I think of and about it, then we've got some major rationality problems for the naturalist as well. I mean, it's not just intentionality is a problem, but now rationality becomes a problem for the naturalist. And, I often refer to this as, or I have referred to it anyway, as the libertarian freedom of intentionality. So I jotted these thoughts down in my notebook and started crafting a syllogism expressing these thoughts as soon as class was over. And I remember sharing them with you. And then I started sharing these thoughts with Dr. Smith, and he helped me fine tune the original syllogism. And it's continued to evolve over the past 8 years as I've tried to bring clarity to the premises, and definitely the defense of the premises has evolved as well. And like I said, the argument really seems to get stronger, I think, every year that I advance it. And I think it's even, like I said, it's growing stronger now. So here's the deal. If one wants to take on the free thinking argument, if they want to take a crack at the free thinking argument, they had better be up to date on the issue. Bignon's first crack at the argument was on Eli's show during part 1. And he was merely addressing an old version of it, one of the first versions that I wrote. So he offered many objections that fell flat because these issues have already been dealt with on our website. Not to mention my dissertation and my upcoming book, but he doesn't have access to those yet. But many of these have already been dealt with on our website for free. Everybody has access to it. So in my response then to Bignon, I pointed out that he was attacking a straw. Well, okay, maybe he wasn't attacking a straw man. Let's just say he was attacking an old man, because there's a younger and much stronger version of the argument waiting for him around the corner. And he's kind of mad that Bignon's been picking on his old man, this younger version of it. So, so I wouldn't say it's a straw man, but I want to encourage people, if they want to take on the free thinking argument, stay up to date on it. Look at some of the more recent blogs and videos that I've done, and definitely make sure you stay tuned for my upcoming book. But, you don't want to attack a version of anybody's argument that's not the strongest version. You don't want to attack a straw man. You don't want to attack an old man, even if it's inadvertently. You want to attack an Iron Man. That's what you want. You want to get the strongest version of the argument possible. Try to take that down. And if you're successful there, good job. But today, we're going to deal with Bignon's attack against the younger and much stronger Iron Man version of the free thinking argument. In fact, it seems to me, like I said, that this argument is standing stronger than ever before, and we'll get into that.
All right. Yeah. And once again, if anybody has anything that they'd like to lob against the free thinking argument, put them in the comments. If we don't get to it now, we will get to it at some point. So, maybe another live stream or just even a live Q&A. That might be fun. What do you think?
That sounds great.
All right. All right. So then before we dive in, just give us a big picture. What are your overall thoughts? Lay us out a general map of what we're going to talk about.
All right. I think Bignon made several mistakes, if not many mistakes, in his 2 videos with Eli Ayala. But let me say that after advancing my arguments against atheists and naturalists over the past 8 years, I mean, that's it's the free thinking argument against naturalism. So atheists and naturalists, they're my target here.
Right.
And I've been advancing this argument over the past 8 years. Let me say this. Guillaume Bignon, a fellow Christian, has offered better objections to my argument than any atheist I've ever encountered, even though atheists are my primary target. So it's kind of crazy to think, wow, a fellow brother in Christ is coming after me when the atheists can't do it.
Iron and sharpening iron.
That's right. That's the way I look at it. And yeah, we're throwing some jabs back and forth at each other a little bit, but in the end, I know we both are seeking truth. We both desire truth, and this is an iron sharpening exercise that helps both of us get closer to truth. And everybody that's following along, I pray that it brings you closer to truth as well. Yep. I think I'm right. He thinks he's right, but based on logic, we both can't be right.
Yeah.
And so this exercise, even though we kind of have a little fun at each other's expense at times, I love the guy. I respect him as a scholar. I just think he's wrong. And I bet he feels the exact same way about me. So even when we're having fun at each other's expense and he makes memes about me or whatever, I take it in stride. I've got thick skin and I know he's just having fun. I'll do the same thing in return. So I'll say this. I'm actually grateful for Bignon's objections, because in the end, this iron sharpening will only make my case stronger. And I believe it already has. Now to be clear, many of his objections, I've already anticipated them. Because my fellow, with you and others in the Molinist Facebook group, we've had many great conversations where a lot of these guys have already anticipated some of these objections. Even for the past 2 or 3 years, I've dealt with some of these objections that Bignon has now raised. So even though I've had these interactions with fellow Molinists who have kind of taken a devil's advocate approach to argue against me, in fact, I think some of them actually at the time thought they were good arguments. I guess I wasn't totally surprised by many of these, but many of these conversations have been behind closed doors. But Bignon has now taken this theological dust up to the streets for all to enjoy. So welcome to the dust up, and I do hope you enjoy it. Again, I enjoy a good iron sharpening theological dust up, and that's what we got right now. But anyway, after watching part 2 and taking detailed handwritten notes, my hand was hurting for the next 48 hours. I think I filled up like 5 notebooks of handwritten notes.
Oh, man.
I wrote, after doing that and then typing out a response, I wrote a 20,000 word response, over 20,000 words in response to Bignon's, what I would say his multiple mistakes on part 2 of his video with Eli. Now I plan on either sharing that on the website in a long blog or maybe multiple
blog
soon. Maybe I'll discuss that. Braxton, Hunter, and Leighton Flowers and I have talked about doing another video response soon. Maybe I'll bring all of that there. I don't know for sure. Maybe it'll be you and I talking about this, Fox. I've got a lot more to say than I'm going to talk about today.
All right. So then, you know what? Let's just get to it then.
Okay.
Let's just get to it.
Well, should I do a flyover of some of the things?
Yeah, do that flyover. Let's get those arguments, the flyover.
Just some of the things I'll talk about. I mean, what was it, Fox? Like you said something about like if God causes you to do something, then you still do it, and they say, well, you're still doing it, right?
Yeah. So one of the arguments that they brought up was it was something that a lot of non-determinists or indeterminists, however they word it, say about determinism, that if God causes you to choose X, then you didn't choose X. Now, Bignon says right in the wording of it, it's okay, if God causes you to choose X, he says in the wording, you still choose X. And I got to be honest, just from the wording of that, it sounds right. Like it sounds as if, it's just self-refuting at face value.
Right. Just really quick. Hey, when I used to pick on my younger cousins back in the day, I'd grab their wrists and I'd start making them hit their own face. And then my mom would say, and I'd say to them, hey, why are you hitting yourself? Why are you hitting yourself? Hey, stop picking on your cousins. And I say, well, they're the ones hitting themselves. All right, see, we'll touch on that later. But here's some of the bigger issues that I'd like to touch on. I think he really misses the bigger picture when he appeals to a conditional ability in an attempt to escape the problem of a lack of a categorical ability. Why? Because on exhaustive divine determinism, which you'll hear me abbreviate as ED quite often, on ED, the so-called conditional is really God's will. We'll talk about that later.
Something else he has a problem with, the E, which we need to talk about. He doesn't think it belongs there.
He doesn't like the fact that I add the word exhaustive for clarification, by the way. But yeah, I'm going to talk about that too. I have really good reasons, philosophical reasons, to add that important word exhaustive. There's other definitions of determinism that it doesn't have to be exhaustive, but being honest, clear, he does believe that God exhaustively, causally determines everything that happens. Everything. Anything you can think of, God causally determined it. So anyway, it also seems to me that Bignon fails to see the the total picture when he attempts to free Calvinism combined with Ed from the analogies of puppets and robots and manipulation and mental illness. He discusses these in his book.
Yes.
I don't think his attempts to free his view from those analogies work in the end. I think he can avoid them for a little bit, but ultimately they're going to come back and get him. I'll talk about that soon, not today. Also, Bignon makes a big mistake when he says that the libertarian cannot appeal to libertarian freedom to escape the problem of natural evil. Now, to his credit, he does affirm that the libertarian has means to escape the problem of moral evil by appealing to libertarian freedom. And so then this weapon of self-defense, he says, is not available for those committed to his Ed view, to exhaustive divine determinism. But then regarding natural evil, he says we're in the same boat, so don't sabotage the boat. Well, he's dead wrong. We're not in the same boat. In fact, I make the case that libertarian freedom combined with something called divine middle knowledge, mere Molinism, can answer the problems of both moral and natural evil. In fact, I think it can ultimately answer all the problems of evil, whether it be moral evil, natural evil, if you want to call it gratuitous evil, hiddenness, anything that somebody says isn't the way things ought to be. I think Molinism has the answers. It combines libertarian freedom and God's middle knowledge. So Bignon says he doesn't know any scholar who does this. Well, now he knows one. I do it in my doctoral dissertation, and that's part of what makes a dissertation good, is unique if it forges new ground. So anyway, stay tuned for my soon-to-be-published doctoral dissertation by Whippenstock. Coming up.
I think that's the 4th time you told us to look out for my book, look out for my book. So yeah, we got to keep count of that. Somebody keep count in the comments every time he tells us to look out for his book. But all right, let's talk about it then. Do we have any details, release date, price? Is there an Amazon pre-order page up?
Oh, no. Sadly, no, I don't have any of these details yet.
Stay tuned.
Yeah, the contract has been signed. The foreword has been written. I don't want to tell you who wrote the foreword yet, but I just got the foreword. I just saw it this last week. I'll tell you this, the foreword will be worth the price of the book alone.
Wow.
Yeah, so I can't wait for people to see that. Yeah, so the contracts have been signed. The final draft is done. Now I'm waiting on Whippenstock. It's on their timeline now. So believe me, I will keep everybody posted.
Oh, you will.
You know what? One more thing. Well, no, for the sake of time, let's skip.
All right.
I'll just say this. I think many of his objections were already preemptively answered in my upcoming book. So I think if you get my book, you're going to see many of these objections that he raises, they fall flat. And if they aren't in my book, I think I've addressed them in that 20,000 word response that I've written. I probably won't publish that in book form. I'll probably share that for free on the website. So anyway, stay tuned. Today, I'd like to have you talk to me about what I would call the worst of his mistakes. So today's response will be focused on Bignon's objections to the free-thinking argument against naturalism. I also abbreviate that a lot of times and just call it the FAAN, the FAAN, right? But we got the free-thinking argument against naturalism, and oftentimes I just refer to it as the free-thinking argument because it can be edited to go after some other things apart from naturalism. But primarily, I'm talking about the free-thinking argument against naturalism, and Bignon says he doesn't like that argument, thinks it fails. So the first thing I want to point out is that Bignon admitted and affirmed a key piece of evidence that I contend makes my case and ultimately defeats his own. So imagine a good courtroom drama, and the defendant takes the stand and is being cross-examined by Tom Cruise, when suddenly the defendant, Guillaume Bignon in this case, inadvertently affirms his own guilt while under oath.
Wow.
That's pretty close to what I think happened in his part 2 interview with Eli.
And that's a bold claim, Strat. I'm going to hold you to it.
All right. I hope you do.
All right, so let's get down to it. All right, so you've noted that there's a number of Calvinists who seem to disagree with Bignon's exhaustive divine determinism, which Bignon believes is simply consistent Calvinism, that Calvinism is deterministic.
Yeah.
So Eli quotes your question to Bignon: does God causally determine Calvinists such as Greg Koukl, who is one of my apologetic heroes?
Mm-hmm.
Does he causally, there we go, determine Calvinists like Koukl to disagree with you?
Yeah, and Bignon provides pure gold for a response as far as I'm concerned. He makes it clear and exclaims, quote, "The answer is yes, all things are determined." He goes on and says, so yeah, God did causally determine that, end quote. And by that, he means that God causally determined Greg Koukl, poor Greg Koukl, to affirm a false belief. Now, so for those involved in this particular debate, for those playing this particular game, this statement is the epitome of a game changer. And we're going to see exactly why this is the case as we move forward in our conversation today.
All right, be careful with that phrase game changer. You don't want them to make another meme about you.
I'm sure memes are coming.
They better be coming. That's part of the fun.
That's right.
All right, so now we really start getting into the free thinking argument. Eli quotes you saying, quote, "You could only believe otherwise if God had caused you to believe otherwise," end quote. So Eli adds that you think this, quote, "undermines the possibility of knowledge," end quote. So Bignon seems to affirm your point and says, quote, "Yes, it does. God wouldn't just cause me to believe otherwise, regardless of the evidence," end quote.
Not so fast, Guillaume. So based on Bignon's own admissions, Calvinists who have the same evidence disagree with Bignon, and Bignon has affirmed that God is the one who causally determines this disagreement. Thus, God is the one who has caused and determined at least one person to affirm false beliefs. Mm-hmm. Now, I think Bignon would affirm that all humans hold some false beliefs. Mm-hmm. Thus, God causally determines all humans to affirm false beliefs. Now, Bignon later wants to refer to what he calls the normal cases. Well, this is the normal case if ed is true. If exhaustive divine determinism is true, this is the normal case. So Bignon can't have it both ways.
All right, well, Bignon then explains in his ed view, exhaustive divine determinism, "I would believe otherwise if the evidence had been otherwise."
Sorry, but that doesn't follow on his ed view, because even elect Calvinists and all other Christians can look at the exact same evidence and reach different conclusions. Why? Because according to Guillaume, God causally determines the conclusions each person will reach, including those who affirm false and absurd conclusions. So if that's the case, so much for being aimed at truth or truth tracking.
Yeah, those are big phrases that are going to come up again.
Right. It's not about tracking truth or being aimed at truth if ed is true. Mm-hmm. So on Bignon's exhaustive divine determinism, it really isn't about the evidence. Rather, it's about Bignon's nature, that God causally determined to evaluate the evidence and conclude ed. And, for poor Greg Koukl and many other Calvinists, not to mention the majority of other Christians, to evaluate the exact same evidence and conclude not ed. So on Bignon's view, the conditional is ultimately God's will. It's not the evidence.
So then what's your personal view? You've been talking about his view. What's your view?
I guess my personal view is that God does not causally determine all of our thoughts and beliefs all the time. Rather, he created us in his image and gave us the ability and provides us the freedom to evaluate, to judge, to estimate, and to weigh between different options, each compatible with our image of God nature. So even though our cognitive faculties are functioning properly, if we are not careful, we can still make mistakes. Even with your libertarian freedom. However, with libertarian freedom, we can always go back and reevaluate our assumptions and presuppositions and prior beliefs. On ed, though, on exhaustive divine determinism, those are all caused and determined by something other than you, the thing you refer to as I, also known as the self.
Mm-hmm. All right, so Bignon said, quote, "The mechanism of my brain through which God causes me to believe something is," and here's a key phrase, "reasons responsive." Mm-hmm. So it would have responded to reasons if the reasons had been different. I would have believed differently.
See, on his view, though, God causally determines how we respond to reasons. So Bignon simply misses the point of the free thinking argument and my defense of it yet again. In fact, I argue that we are free and able to reason. And by this, I point to what is meant by deliberation. And I appeal to Webster's dictionary. I think he affirms this definition. But Webster says this is deliberation. Quote, "To weigh in the mind," right? To weigh in the mind, to consider and examine the reasons for and against a measure, to estimate the weight of force of arguments or the probable consequences of a measure in order to a choice or decision, to pause and consider. Now, with the definition in place, consider the next question raised. Is it possible to truly deliberate without libertarian freedom? That is to say, if you are causally determined by something or someone else, can you, the thing you refer to as I, truly deliberate? Well, the answer emerges after dwelling upon the nature of determinism. For if exhaustive determinism is true, then the non-rational laws of nature and past events, or God, always exhaustively determines a person's considerations, their examinations, and their estimations. You know, all of one's thoughts about their beliefs and all of one's beliefs about their thoughts. That's up to something or someone else apart from your control. And if that is the case, then the person who assumes they are doing the reasoning here, that they are reasoning through this issue, cannot rationally affirm or provide justification that their beliefs really are the best or true, including their belief that determinism is true. So with this in mind, it seems that libertarian freedom is necessary if one genuinely possesses the ability to rationally evaluate one's thoughts and beliefs and to deliberate in the truest sense. So it follows that if deliberation is impossible, then so is rationality. But think about it. If something or someone other than Bignon causally determines Bignon's cognitive faculties to conclude X about certain evidence and data, then the thing Bignon refers to as I has no ability to consider other options, if better options are available or not. So Bignon is not the evaluator here if someone else causally determines exactly what his evaluation will be. So this Ed view becomes an even bigger problem when Christians, let alone elect Calvinists, disagree on issues. This disagreement, after all, is caused and determined by God, not the evidence, if exhaustive divine determinism is true. So if a mad scientist caused and determined a French philosopher to respond to reasons in a specific way, then this French philosopher stands in no position to reason and evaluate if the mad scientist has caused and determined the French philosopher to respond to reasons adequately, correctly, or not. It's really quite simple.
Okay. So Eli quotes again, quote, "If all your thoughts and beliefs are always aimed at your greatest desires and they're not aimed at truth, then no one stands in an epistemic position to argue or rationally affirm that his claims are any good at all." Bignon responds, yeah, and so Tim also says, and they're not aimed at truth. He says, you get that part, the not aimed at truth part, you get that part from naturalistic determinism. So is there a difference between naturalistic determinism and theistic determinism?
Well, let me just say, okay, so look, he said that that they're not aimed at truth. You get that part from naturalistic determinism, that they're not aimed at truth. Well, I thought Bignon rejected the free thinking argument against naturalism. But based on these comments here, however, he now seems to affirm it, at least tacitly. I don't know if he realizes what he's doing, but in part one, he said that the free thinking argument against naturalism, the FAAN, is successful, or if it's successful, then it really hits the Calvinist hard, right? Well, which one is it? If it follows from naturalism, as Bignon just affirmed, then the FAAN is sound. So if that's the case, does Bignon now retract what he said about it also hitting the Calvinist hard? If not, then so much for his Calvinistic view, at least his particular metaphysical view of ed, EDD. So, yeah.
Right. Bignon continues, quote, he's saying that this whole notion is Alvin Plantinga's evolutionary argument against naturalism, which I affirm myself.
Yeah. Okay, well, to that, I'll say that's not quite right. I'm glad he affirms Plantinga's evolutionary argument against naturalism. But Alvin Plantinga has argued that if both naturalism and evolution are true, then human beliefs are not aimed at truth because they're aimed at survival as opposed to truth. Thus, since they're not aimed at truth, they're not trustworthy or reliable. Now, it says nothing about exhaustive determinism. After all, perhaps the quantum realm is indeterministic. In fact, it seems to be that way. That the evolutionary argument against naturalism, known as the EAAN, is simply focused on human evolution combined with naturalism. But I argue for something deeper. If evolution is true or not, it's irrelevant. I demonstrate that thoughts and beliefs are either not aimed at anything at all, because physics and chemistry doesn't aim at anything. Physics and chemistry simply fizzes and pops, right? Sure. Maybe you can say that they're aimed at your greatest desires, if Jonathan Edwards was right. But if they're aimed at your greatest desires, that's a problem too, because they're not intentionally aimed at truth. They're not aimed by you if something or someone causes and determines everything about you, including what you aim at. So better put, on Bignon's ed view, all human thoughts and beliefs are always aimed perfectly at God's will. Think about that. If God causes and determines all human incorrect thoughts and all affirmations of false beliefs, then our beliefs are not aimed at truth, unless this God of deception occasionally feels like planting a true belief in your head. Be that as it may, on exhaustive divine determinism, you would have no way to evaluate that belief for yourself. So with that in mind, Bignon is in no position and has no ability to evaluate what he is being caused and determined to believe, or what he's being caused and determined to affirm. That is to say, unless he's wrong about ed, which he is. But here's the point. If Bignon does have any ability to self-evaluate his beliefs, then his beliefs, they're wrong. Here's the bottom line. If Bignon affirms Plantinga's EAAN, which he says he does, then he should also affirm my FAAN, which he seemed to do inadvertently anyway. And if he affirms the FAAN, then he must affirm the core of the syllogism. And if he affirms the core, then he should, if he is able, also reject EDD, exhaustive divine determinism, which is his particular favorite flavor of Calvinism. Now, that doesn't mean he's got to drop his Calvinistic theology. He needs to drop his ed philosophy, his metaphysical view. That's what he's got to drop. He can keep his 5-point tulip.
Okay, so Bignon claims, quote, being determined does not entail that you are not aimed at truth.
Well, it does entail that Bignon is not aiming at truth if something or someone else is doing all the aiming. On his view, you don't aim at anything any more than my Glock does. Remember, guns don't kill people, people kill people. But on ed, ultimately, God does all the killing because he is the ultimate aimer in a causally determined sense. So if nature is all that exists, then the forces of nature, physics and chemistry, do all the aiming. If a mad scientist controls and determines my intentionality, then the mad scientist does the aiming. And if, replace the forces of nature or the mad scientist with anything else, including God, and you got the exact same rationality problems, but for different reasons.
All right, so then for a quick recap, you don't think there's any real difference between naturalistic determinism or theistic determinism. So you think that neither one can get you rationality.
Well, you're going to have problems with both. I do not. I believe premise 3 of the argument, FreeThinking argument, is true. If everything about humanity, including everything you think of and about, and exactly how you think of and about it, is up to something other than you, then you don't have the ability to infer a better belief if it's available or not. You cannot rationally infer or rationally affirm a better belief, let alone a true belief.
All right, so now at this point, Bignon brings in some props. He talks about his philosophy class that he teaches. So he makes the point, he quote, being determined does not entail that you are not aimed at truth. So that's the point that he's trying to make. He brings out a thermometer and the magic 8-ball. So he could kind of comparing truth tracking in humans to inanimate objects.
Yeah, I know, right? Okay, first of all, I find it quite odd that Bignon revolts when others point out that on Calvinistic ed, humans are nothing more than wet robots. And he complains that this comparison is not relevantly analogous. But now Bignon goes much further and compares humanity to a mere thermometer. I mean, come on, man. If you're going to say that we can't compare humans to robots on your view, then you can't compare humans to thermometers.
Right. So yeah, earlier in their discussion, Bignon does educate us all about analogies. And he says that to be a good analogy, there must be relevant similarities with no relevant differences. And to be fair, at that point, he was talking about moral responsibility, not about being aimed at truth. Mm-hmm. That said, do you think a thermometer can still be a good way of showing that something can be determined and aimed at truth?
Well, look. Neither robots, magic 8-balls, or thermometers are self-conscious or think of and about things. Mm-hmm. They do not consider competing hypotheses. They do not engage in the process of rationality to infer the best explanation. Mm-hmm. So that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. So even if they were conscious, but mm-hmm. didn't have the freedom as to what they were going to think of and about or how they were going to think of and about it, that's, you know, even if you're conscious, big deal. If you don't have the freedom to think, then you don't really have an advantage. In fact, I would say it's ultimately a disadvantage if it leads to your eternal conscious torment in hell. But those kinds of things are not relevantly analogous to the kinds of specific knowledge that I'm talking about in the free thinking argument. It's not even close. Now, in the old man version of the argument, I can see you raising this. I've tightened things up. So this is not going to work. So the pertinent question raised is this: is the designer of the thermometer, did that designer intend the thermometer to track truth correctly or not? And on ed, that is not always God's intent when it comes to humanity. At least human thermometer makers seem to have a desire for thermometers to always track truth adequately. But it's too bad for the God of ed does not have that same desire for humans. Isn't Bignon a computer programmer?
Yes.
Okay, if that's the case, you've got a background in that field too, right, Fox?
Yes.
Yeah, and I've talked to several philosophers of computer science and even to understand this thing better. Computers they don't think of and about things at all. So you think about computers and calculators and thermometers and a thermometer is different than a calculator. However, if the creator of a thermometer programmed the thermometer to read 98.6 degrees every time the temperature was actually over 100 degrees, mm-hmm. the thermometer would have no way to evaluate or rationally affirm if it had been determined to think and believe correctly. Not that thermometers think or believe anything, but let's do a crazy thought experiment and say that it can. God supernaturally zapped the thermometer with consciousness, mm-hmm. right? It couldn't think, it couldn't evaluate this. All it could do is assume. Not that thermometers assume anything, but let's pretend they do. The thermometer could only assume, and that assumption would also be programmed and caused and determined by its maker. So even if it's a bad assumption, well, it's not up to the thermometer, it's up to the maker on what does the maker intend. So one huge relevant difference between a thermometer and a human, if Bignon's ed view is true, is that the creator of thermometers they intend and design thermometers to always track truth. If ed is true, the creator of humans does not always intend humans to track truth. In fact, as Bignon affirms, God causally determines even his fellow elect Calvinists to affirm false beliefs. So anyway, there are so many relevant differences here. And I discuss some of these issues in greater detail in a couple articles on my website. One, I believe, is entitled A Lesson About Free Will and Responsibility. Mm-hmm. I also discussed this in a recent article just in the last couple of weeks, I think, called Computers Don't Know Jack. Bottom line, if a computer does not possess knowledge, a thermometer definitely does not possess knowledge. If computers don't know jack, thermometers don't know jack. So thus, as Bignon would say, this thermometer analogy is not relevantly analogous.
Once again, freethinkingministries.com. All right. So Bignon says that the thermometer is trustworthy and the 8-ball isn't. So that's what he thinks is the difference between the two.
But neither the 8-ball, the thermometer, or Guillaume Bignon, on his view, can evaluate the trustworthiness of anything. If all evaluative thoughts are caused and determined by nature, the mad scientist, thermometer makers, or God, right? It's just that's the problem there. They can't evaluate the trustworthiness of anything if something else other than them is deciding that for them.
Right. Well, Bignon says the problem is that the magic 8-ball is not aiming at truth.
Amen to that. All right, we're going to agree on that. What Bignon is failing to realize is that he has the exact same problem with with exhaustive divine determinism. On his view, humans are sometimes aimed at truth by God, but in a majority of other instances, in the normal cases that he likes to talk about, in the normal cases, humans are aimed at false metaphysical and theological beliefs by God. So on ed, humanity is always aimed at God's will, which is not guaranteed to be equivalent to true belief. In fact, according to Bignon's previous, what I call the game-changing admission, if exhaustive divine determinism is true, all affirmations of false beliefs are causally determined by God. So it follows that if God aims Bignon at a false belief, well, Bignon will hit the bullseye and happily affirm his false belief as true. He has no ability to do otherwise if exhaustive divine determinism is true.
All right, Bignon said, similarly, the reason that you can't trust your brain on naturalistic determinism is that it's not aimed at truth.
Yeah, okay, and again, just like that, Bignon now affirms the primary point of the free-thinking argument against naturalism.
So is he the one who wrote the foreword?
No, he didn't. He did not write the foreword, but he should at least endorse it if he's going to say things like that. I can guarantee you this. I do endorse his book in a sense, even though I think he's wrong. I think he does the best job of any Calvinist or compatibilist or determinist out there making his case. And I know I've sold many books for him because I tell people, I'm like, man, if you're going to argue against this view, you better go check out Guillaume Bignon. He does the best. He's the best at it. And so, man, I mean, with that said, I mean, if this is the best, and I think it is, if it fails, then so much for the view. But again, that's not an attack against him. I'm saying he does awesome work. I just don't think that his arguments are, I don't think they win the day. I'll just say that.
Okay.
But I've endorsed his book, and I know I've sold many books for him.
Wow. All right. Well, are you at least getting a commission from it?
I'm waiting for my check.
All right. So we all agree that on naturalistic determinism, your brain is not aimed at truth. I think that's something that we all could agree on, Bignon included. Bignon then says, quote, while on Calvinistic determinism, it is, meaning your brain is aimed at truth. He continues, so I think it's pretty much a slam dunk here.
Okay. Slam dunk? Well, with basketball in mind and with slam dunks in mind, I suppose it is a takeoff from the free throw line, 360-degree windmill tomahawk slam dunk through traffic and over a 7-foot center, game-winning slam dunk at the buzzer for Team FreeThinking Ministries. But with basketball in mind, I think Bignon shoots an air ball here. On Bignon's own view that he affirmed in part 2 with Eli, exhaustive divine determinism, or ED, is not always aimed at truth. You see, God causes some to believe lies and also affirm false beliefs. Thus, our beliefs are always perfectly aimed at the center of God's will, which is typically for humans, on his view, to believe and affirm false beliefs, especially on theological issues. So Bignon admits this is the God that he believes in. However, this doesn't seem to be a maximally great being we're talking about here, a being who causally determines creatures to affirm false beliefs. But if God is not a maximally great being, then Bignon, I should say, stands in no position to know if God is causing and determining him to think correctly about this entire issue or not. So really, this ultimately seems to become a lesson in self-destruction. The mad scientist, nature, or God might occasionally aim humans at truth, but Bignon admits that sometimes God aims people, like poor Greg Kokel, at false beliefs, and God never misses. Moreover, I'm sure Bignon does not affirm that all of his affirmations correspond to reality. That would be for him to, seems to me that would be claiming infallibility or something like that. So I'm sure he wouldn't admit that I'm sure he would say that he's holding some false beliefs. Well, he has no ability, according to his view, to correct his false views. Only if God's the conditional here, only if God stops causing and determining him to affirm false beliefs, could Bignon hold true beliefs. In fact, I wrote an article about this called Proper Function and Libertarian Freedom. In it, I demonstrate that proper function requires libertarian freedom. So I encourage people to read that.
All right. So Eli asks Bignon if Stratton is assuming the naturalistic argument, meaning the free-thinking argument, and then simply imposing it upon the Calvinist. Bignon answers, quote, "Yeah, the argument is very similar. It's a claim that somehow you shouldn't trust your cognitive faculties for some reason, and the some reason is, in the case of Tim Stratton's argument, is just that you're determined."
It's much more than that. I don't think that Bignon has really taken the time to try to understand my argument. He clearly did not understand it in his part 1 with Eli. And after I corrected him in my response video, it still seems that he has not carefully examined my defense of the premises in the syllogism carefully. The primary point I make is that if it's the case that everything you think of and about and exactly how you think of and about it, I mean, that point is so vital, right? The how, if something else causally determines not just what you think of and about all the time, but how you think of and about it, right? If that's caused and determined by something or someone other than the self, the thing you refer to as I, then the self is in no position to rationally infer or affirm claims of knowledge. And on Bignon's Ed view, God causes and determines all false beliefs, just like the mad scientist and my thought experiments. So with that in mind, and contrary to Bignon's assertions, it is relevantly analogous. But think about this. I mean, the naturalist seems to have some stronger ground, some higher ground to stand on here. The naturalist, at least, can appeal to the truth tracking of survival. I mean, it stands to reason that one will probably survive better if one has mostly true beliefs about his physical environment, which is far different than metaphysical and theological beliefs. But at the end of the day, if one's cognitive faculties do not possess the ability to reject incoherent thinking, option 1, in favor of rational thinking, option 2, then something seems to have gone terribly wrong with one's cognitive faculties. So I think that's the bigger issue there.
Okay. So Bignon says, again, he affirms the argument, the evolutionary argument against naturalism by Plantinga, and I deny Tim Stratton's argument because I think that the relevant piece here is not being determined. The relevant piece is being, and here's the phrase again, aimed at truth. So what do you say to that?
Well, okay. First of all, Bignon seems to be all over the place here because he seemed to affirm my argument earlier even inadvertently or tacitly, and now denies it for all the wrong reasons. However, the reason he affirms the EAAN also applies to the FAAN. That is to say, the reason why he affirms the evolutionary argument against naturalism also applies to the free-thinking argument against naturalism. And since Bignon affirms the EAAN, he should affirm the FAAN, because if all that exists is nature, then all is ultimately caused and determined by the forces of nature. Let me say that again. If all that exists is nature, then all is ultimately caused and determined by the forces of nature. For example, physics, chemistry, quantum mechanics, and things outside of human control. Thus, since physics and chemistry simply fizzes and pops, it does not intentionally aim at anything, including truth. On this view, the lack of libertarian freedom to evaluate one's beliefs, which is merely caused and determined by physics and chemistry, fizzing and popping, is damning for the naturalists. So what is relevant is that the aimer on naturalistic determinism is not a thinking thing or an intentional agent. It's not an intentional aimer. It just shoots as wildly as the initial conditions of the Big Bang that, according to the thesis of naturalism, if naturalism is true, the initial conditions of the Big Bang were not fine-tuned by an intelligent designer. On Ed, however, the aimer intentionally shoots all kinds of targets, and this includes a multitude of targets other than truth, and this perfect aimer never misses. So if that's the case, so much for being trustworthy or reliable if Ed is true, if exhaustive divine determinism is true.
So no truth tracking.
Yeah, there's major problems when it comes to truth tracking. It aims at the center of God's will. It's not aimed at truth.
Okay. So as they continue to discuss the free-thinking argument, Bignon makes the following claims. Quote, "I'll tell you full well which escape I take from the free-thinking argument. I deny the conditional that if determinism is true, you can't have knowledge or draw rational inferences."
Yeah. And don't forget the rational affirmations. He seems to consistently and conveniently ignore that important piece. I put it in the premises, included it in the syllogism for a reason. But if one's nature is such that it's caused and determined to always judge an idea or a concept or a premise, etc., as bad, when it's actually true, then one cannot infer the best explanation. It's really quite simple. And so Bignon can simply deny that simple truth all he wants, but big deal. I mean, it takes much more than a say, well, I reject that premise or I deny it. Atheists will also deny the first premise of the Kalam or the premise in the moral argument until they're blue in the face, but a mere denial does not refute the argument. You need good reasons. So a mere denial apart from good reasons don't get you anywhere. But Bignon can deny such a simple premise if you'd like. But I think most people out there are probably not so committed to these odd metaphysical assumptions. I mean, which is really, they complained about this a little bit. I've called it, I've compared these exhaustive divine determinists who are also Calvinists. Not all Calvinists affirm that weird view, right? But the Calvinists who are so committed to Ed, I've referred to them as kind of a cult. I'm not saying they're a cult. I understand they understand the gospel. They have a relationship with Jesus Christ. They're going to heaven, right? But their commitment to this metaphysical view of exhaustive determinism gets kind of cultish because they're so committed to a metaphysical view that it's not a biblical view or a theological view. It's a metaphysical philosophy, this exhaustive determinism. They just think it best describes their tulip, but I think they're dead wrong. Bignon mistakenly thinks that I would affirm that view. I don't. I'd make it clear in my dissertation and in my soon to be published book.
There it is again.
That you can affirm all 5 points of tulip and still affirm libertarian freedom. Greg Kokel does this beautifully, and I explain how you can do this in my book. So stay tuned.
All right, stay tuned. All right. Eli noted that Bignon had been interacting with your older version of the free thinking argument against naturalism in part 1. So then let's make sure that we're discussing the updated free thinking argument.
Yeah, in the past couple of years, I've been advancing an updated syllogism, the younger and stronger version, that seems to avoid much of the criticism, if not all of the criticism, that Bignon offered in his first conversation on Eli's show. Indeed, I've got several versions of the free thinking argument. Mm-hmm. And by the way, I've included these in my dissertation and soon to this upcoming book.
I'm counting my toes now.
But here's probably one of the most common and popular updated versions. It's very similar to the original, but it's made some vital changes. So it's still 8 steps. Let me go through it. Premise 1, if naturalism is true, the immaterial human soul does not exist. Mm-hmm. Premise 2, if the soul does not exist, libertarian freedom does not exist. 3, if libertarian freedom does not exist, then it's impossible to either rationally infer or rationally affirm knowledge claims. 4, it is possible to rationally infer or rationally affirm knowledge claims. 5, deductive conclusion. Therefore, libertarian freedom exists. 6, deductive conclusion. Therefore, the soul exists. 7, deductive conclusion. Therefore, naturalism is false. And 8, an abductive conclusion. The best explanation for the existence of libertarian freedom and the soul is the biblical view of God. Now, I love that abductive conclusion. It's really a beginning of another argument, which I do argue for this. Stay tuned for my upcoming book. I do make that case, and I really like this because now I'm talking about metaphysics and epistemology, and then get to tie it back into the Bible and ultimately to the gospel. Right. So I love this argument. Bignon is clear that he rejects the third premise.
Okay, the third premise. Can you say that again then? That the one that he rejects?
Yeah. Number 3, if libertarian freedom does not exist, then it's possible to either rationally infer or rationally affirm knowledge claims.
Okay, so that's the one that he rejects.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So in response to Eli telling Bignon that you updated your argument, Bignon says, quote, that's fine with me. In that case, Tim is no longer targeting all knowledge. Maybe I misunderstood. If that's the case, Tim is only targeting knowledge obtained by inference, end quote.
Yeah, and also rational affirmations of knowledge claims. You can't forget that. I included it in the syllogism for a reason. But I do appreciate Bignon here saying that he seems to have misunderstood. So really with that said, if you're watching Eli's first video, everything he says regarding the free thinking argument, I would just say don't even watch it, because he really attacked a strong man or an old man instead of the Iron Man. Yeah. So anyway, I argue that on a libertarian free thinker view, one can affirm knowledge claims by making sure that he, right, the thing one refers to as I, has done their due diligence to aim at the target of truth, as opposed to their subjective greatest desires or personal wants or biases, etc. Fox, you and I had Mike Licona as a professor at Biola. He's now at Houston Baptist University. And Mike and I have since become really good friends. But Mike explains this quite nicely in his Resurrection book. And I remember he talked to us about this.
What's the title?
What's that?
The title?
The Resurrection of Jesus.
New
historiographical approach or something like that. Sorry, Mike, I butchered it. Get Mike Licona's Resurrection book. It's really big.
Yeah, that's it. It's the big one.
Yeah, the big one. It's like almost 800 pages. But anyway, in that book, in our class that we had with him, Mike explains how we can attempt to free ourselves from our greatest desires so that we can intentionally aim at truth instead of our greatest desires. I mean, think about it. I don't think Mike was thinking about this at the time. In fact, I'm pretty sure he wasn't, because I've since talked to him about it. But I said, look, I mean, if Edwardian compatibilism is true, everything you choose, including all of your beliefs, they're ultimately determined or aimed at your greatest desires. But Mike explains that's a horrible reason to think anything is true just because you desire it to be true, and that you can take steps, if you're free to do so, to free yourself from the slavery of your greatest desires, so that you can actually infer the truth and infer the best explanation and rationally affirm claims of knowledge. So the exhaustive determinist, however, does not have access to this exercise, because according to the exhaustive deterministic view, someone or something other than the human did all the aiming for them and determined that for the person. So, well, moreover and more importantly, if something or someone other than you causally determines you to affirm a false belief, then it would be impossible for you to infer or affirm a better belief, let alone the truth. If you think about it, this one sentence, that one sentence seems to refute Bignon's entire objection against the free thinking argument. So let me state it again. If something or someone other than you causally determines you to affirm a false belief, then it would be impossible for you to infer or affirm a better or true belief.
It's that simple.
It's so easy a caveman could do it. I mean,
okay.
It is that simple. And remember, Bignon already made it clear by admitting that God causes and determines all false beliefs that people affirm as true. So on his ed view of exhaustive divine determinism, since God causally determines Bignon to affirm a false belief, then it's impossible for Bignon to infer or affirm a better or true belief. So Bignon can either assert, if he wants to keep his view, he can either assert that God never causally determines him to affirm a false belief, which would be to affirm that Bignon is never wrong, or he can endorse the free thinking argument. I mean, it seems that that's what you're left with. Maybe there's some other options, but I think that's what you're left with.
All right. So Bignon said that he does, quote, insist that knowledge obtained by inference is compatible with determinism. So we have the relevant disagreement to resolve here.
Yeah, great. So let's do that. Let's I think most people can see that this issue has already been resolved, but let's continue to hammer it out and resolve this issue for those who have yet to connect all the dots. So to begin, I'll repeat what I said before, something that if one's nature is such that it's causally determined to judge or evaluate an idea or a concept or a premise as bad, when it's actually not bad at all, but it's true, then one cannot judge, evaluate, or infer a better, the best, or true explanation. Why? Because they were caused and determined to do otherwise. So they can't do it. So this is exactly what Bignon has affirmed. And if he's right, then Bignon cannot rationally infer the best explanation if God causally determines him to affirm propositions that do not correspond to reality, which on the ed view, on his view, happens all the time. That's the normal case.
All right. So Bignon interacts with your mad scientist thought experiment, but he omits a key phrase, exactly how one thinks of and about it. You typically follow this thought experiment by asking a question to show the absurdity and impossibility of exhaustive determinism. Bignon responds by saying that it's a question, not an argument. So what's your response to that? And what is this question?
I mean, I'd say, come on, man. I mean, all right. So first of all, I'm asking a question. If the mad scientist causally determines everything about you, including the next words that are going to come out of your mouth, how can you rationally infer or affirm your beliefs, and not the mad scientist, right? And he says, well, that's a question, not an argument. And I'll say, look, I've given the argument, and I'm trying to support the syllogism with a thought experiment. And the question is rhetorical, by the way. So I know he's a PhD philosopher. He knows better than that. The question is rhetorical and can easily be rephrased into a statement. In fact, I offered what it can be rephrased at earlier. It's this: if something or someone other than you causally determines you to affirm a false belief, right? If something or someone outside of your control causally determines you to affirm a false belief, then it's impossible for you to infer or affirm a better or true belief. So the point, The point with that rhetorical question is that it's impossible for Bignon to rationally affirm anything if the mad scientist or God is doing all the affirming here. It's quite simple. Like I said before, it's so simple a caveman can do it. A caveman can grasp it. But in all seriousness, I have explained this to people of all ages, from elementary school children to PhD professors. It's a simple truth to comprehend. It's like what we talked about earlier. Even I knew as a young kid, a little kid, that when I was grabbing the wrists of my younger cousins who were smaller than me at the time, and I was making them hit their own faces with their own hands and saying, "Why are you hitting yourself? Why are you hitting yourself?" I knew it wasn't them doing it. I was responsible. I was to be the one who got in trouble from my parents, right? When they said, "Tim, stop picking on your cousins," it didn't make sense for me to say, "Oh, they're the ones that are hitting themselves." No, this is so simple. Young children can understand this much. It's not complicated.
All right. So after hearing your mad scientist thought experiment and your following rhetorical question, how can you, not the mad scientist, rationally affirm your beliefs? Bignon responds, quote, "That question is actually quite easy to answer."
Wait a second. I want to speak to Bignon, not the mad scientist.
You're being obnoxious again.
Yeah, apparently.
Bignon replied, "How do I rationally affirm any of my beliefs? For the sake of argument, I can just buy fully into Alvin Plantinga's account of what knowledge is, and I could say exactly this. I have a belief formed by cognitive faculties functioning properly in an environment that is suited to them according to a design plan aimed at truth."
Not so fast. First, I find it odd that a guy committed to exhaustive divine determinism is so quick to buy fully into, to use his words, the view of one of the greatest libertarian freedom fighters of all time and one who's also a Molinist, Alvin Plantinga. Now, I'm sure Plantinga has thought these things through. And as we shall see, Plantinga's view works with Molinism, but not with Ed Calvinism, right? If you're going to combine your Calvinism with exhaustive divine determinism, it's not going to work. So that's the first thing. So Bignon better be careful, with who he buys fully into before he finds himself between a rock and a hard place. But second, why assume your cognitive faculties are functioning properly when, according to your view, God causally determines most people to think incorrectly on these matters? Why assume this God of deception is not deceiving you? You might find that question annoying, but that's a question asked in dead seriousness. So please don't dismiss it and don't ignore it.
All right, Bignon already admitted that God causes and determines all things to happen. And this even includes some Calvinists not aiming at truth. God does the aiming and regularly aims even the elect at false beliefs.
Yeah, right. And this is why I earlier asked, what does functioning properly even mean if everything happens exactly the way God makes it happen on Ed? Can anything ever really go wrong in an ultimate sense if God never fails at causing and determining all things all the time exactly as he desires? Even poor Greg Koukল's false beliefs, according to Bignon, are proper in an ultimate sense. And that's one of the reasons why I quoted the epistemologist Kelly Fitzsimmons Burton. And I've talked to her about this in depth and had several email exchanges with her about this. So I think she's agreeing with me here, and how I'm using her quote here. But she says this, quote, "Proper function of our cognitive faculties must first rule out the deterministic influences." Now, I added the word deterministic in there, but she has affirmed my use of that. So let me say it again. Proper function of our cognitive faculties must first rule out the deterministic influences of outsiders, such as Alpha Centaurion, cognitive scientists, Cartesian evil demons, and also internal influences such as a brain lesion or even the influence of mind-altering substances. All of these influences may cause one's faculties to fail to function properly, end quote. That's in her book, Reason and Proper Function, page 23. Now, again, I've talked to her about this, and I've said, look, I think this even includes God. And then talking about the libertarian freedom of intentionality, she said, yeah, with that in mind, I think she would put God in that paragraph as well. I've invited her on the show to clarify, so she'll be on soon, so stay tuned. But with this in mind, let me share the proper function and libertarian freedom argument. It goes like this. 1, for any human X, X's cognitive faculties are designed to function properly in an appropriate environment. 2, for any human X, if X's cognitive faculties are designed to function properly in an appropriate environment, then through a mature, conscious process of properly functioning faculties, X can reject irrational thinking in favor of rational thinking. 3, therefore, for any human X, X can, through a mature, conscious process of properly functioning faculties, reject irrational thinking in favor of rational thinking. Note that range of options, and this entails libertarian freedom. So the first premise is one that Bignon will happily affirm, I'm sure. The second premise is clarified when realizing the following, that if the forces of nature, a mad scientist, an evil demon, or God causally determines human X to affirm a false belief, then it's impossible for human X to infer or affirm a better or true belief. And since this is a structurally valid syllogism, the conclusion deductively follows. So here's the bottom line. If Bignon does not have access to proper function if he believes he cannot reject incoherent thoughts and beliefs in favor of coherent thoughts and beliefs. His faculties seem to have malfunctioned and are not working properly if this is the case. However, on the Ed view of exhaustive divine determinism, they are working exactly the way God causes and determines them to work.
All right, Bignon said, quote, if Stratton takes the case of the mad scientist and says he excludes any of those items essential for knowledge, then yes, it's going to exclude knowledge. But now it's not analogous to the normal cases I affirm.
Yeah, so there's that term, the normal cases. Right? But on Ed, on exhaustive divine determinism, everything functions perfectly exactly as God designed it to occur. On Ed, we do not live in this kind of environment that is always aimed at truth. I mean, even Adam and Eve, the first humans, didn't enjoy such an environment. And neither did Satan, apparently. I mean, on Ed, our environment is always aimed at God's will. And he sees fit to causally determine a plethora of false beliefs, even amongst Calvinists. So Bignon does not have access to that so-called environment aimed at truth, even if he does happen to be determined to hold a few true beliefs.
All right, Bignon said, quote, the Calvinist God does give us cognitive faculties designed to track truth.
Yeah, so first, at this point, I think it's been made clear that this Calvinist God combined with the metaphysical philosophy of Ed does not exist, right? If Ed is affirmed, then this Calvinist God does not exist. That is to say, if Calvinism requires Ed, as he asserts, then we have provided good reason to reject Ed. So if Ed is false and we demonstrate good reason to think it's false, then Calvinism is false. But fortunately for my Calvinist friends out there, Calvinism is not necessarily wedded to Ed. Thank God for that. So second, if Ed describes reality, then it would be impossible to rationally infer and affirm claims of knowledge. Since Bignon does infer and affirm claims of knowledge on a regular basis, that's good reason for him to drop Ed, at least if he can, if he's got the ability to do so. But if something is causally determining him not to drop Ed, then he simply can't, even if Ed's false. Okay, but Bignon needs to modify his views. That's my point. And let me say it again. He doesn't need to drop 5-point Calvinism. He can keep it. I encourage him to keep your 5-point Calvinism. Just drop Ed and join Calvinists like Greg Koukl. I'm sure Greg Koukl would love to have a reformed Bignon on his team.
All right, Eli said, quote, Tim anticipates the response. He quotes you, okay? So he quotes Tim, you. Consider the mad scientist again. If the mad scientist is causing and determining everything Guillaume thinks of and about, and exactly how Guillaume thinks of and about it, including the next words that will come out of his mouth, how can Guillaume, not the mad scientist, rationally affirm any of his beliefs, especially his belief in question, without begging the question?
Mm-hmm.
The next words out of Bignon's mouth were, for example, well, externalism. I would interrupt and respond, I'd like to respond to Guillaume, please. Bignon responds to your philosophical challenge, yeah, so this is really obnoxious.
Well, all right. Let me be obnoxious and say, well, was that the mad scientist who thinks it's obnoxious, or was it Guillaume? That's my point. Here's the point. This is simply what philosophers do to demonstrate an absurd belief. It's called reductio ad absurdum, to make a point. So Guillaume is a PhD philosopher, and I know that he knows this is common practice. So he needs to either show what's wrong with this challenge or amend his view. He can't merely dismiss it as obnoxious. I might be obnoxious, maybe I am, but there's a real point to be made here, and it needs to be dealt with.
All right, so I'm Orthodox Fox, and you're obnoxious Stratton.
Oh, I'm sure that will stick.
All right. Bignon said, quote, Tim affirms a conditional, if knowledge is possible, then determinism is false.
Yeah, so remember, I'm not merely discussing knowledge in general. Eli, to his credit, is a really good host, and he is a really good host, right? But Eli pointed this mistake out to Bignon in part 2, right? He pointed out that Bignon was attacking the old man. In part 1, he says Stratton has an updated argument. Here it is, and Bignon admitted it. He said, yeah, I might have made a mistake there. But then he affirmed, he affirmed Eli's correction, but then went back to attacking the old man again instead of the Iron Man. So he goes back. I think it's inadvertent. I don't think he meant to do it. But anyway, I've argued for specific kinds of knowledge, not knowledge in general. And I've pointed out exactly why this is the case.
All right, Bignon said, quote, I affirm the antecedent, but deny the consequent. But Tim mocks me for my denial of the consequent as if I were also denying the antecedent. So it's really misguided. So, maybe you should share that mad scientist thought experiment with us again, just for the convenience of those following along.
Okay. All right. So the mad scientist thought experiment, usually offer it like this. And I say, suppose a mad scientist somehow, I don't know how he does it, but somehow he gets control of your brain. And now he exhaustively controls and causally determines all of your thoughts and beliefs all the time. This includes exactly what you think of and about, and exactly how you think of and about it. All of your thoughts about your beliefs and all of your beliefs about your thoughts are caused and determined by the mad scientist. And this also includes the next words that are going to come out of your mouth. Rhetorical question: how can you, not the mad scientist, rationally affirm the current beliefs in your head as good, bad, better, the best, true, or probably true? Note the range of options from which to choose without begging the question. It's impossible. You can't do such a thing, because no matter what words come out of your mouth, whether it be that's really obnoxious or whatever words come out of your mouth, it wasn't you, the thing you refer to as I, who is doing the responding. That's the point. You can't rationally affirm anything as good, bad, better, the best, true, false, obnoxious, or whatever. And moreover, and more importantly, if something or someone other than you causally determines you to affirm a false belief, then it would be impossible for you to infer or affirm a better belief, let alone the truth. So I think, and maybe I'm wrong here, but I thought I saw this in Guillaume's face, but maybe it was wishful thinking. But to me, it seemed that Bignon seemed to realize, at least subconsciously, that he was trapped here and had no escape. And, when he starts saying that I'm obnoxious here. So in a desperate attempt, I think he's trying to make it much more difficult than it needs to be. But this doesn't help. The point of the mad scientist thought experiment is to show the impossibility of rationally affirming his thoughts, beliefs, and the next words out of his mouth if the mad scientist causally determines all of it, the entire show. If the mad scientist is running the entire show, then it's not only impossible. I mean, it shows the absurdity of the entire view. So to be clear, Ed is absurd. Exhaustive divine determinism reduces to absurdity.
All right. So Eli quotes you, quoting epistemologist Kelly Fitzsimmons Burton, whom quoted earlier, seemingly agrees with you on the libertarian freedom of intentionality.
Yeah, I'm confident to say that she does, at least on that issue.
Right. Okay, so Bignon responds, right, but Cartesian demons and mad scientists may cut the link between evidence and belief.
Well, that's exactly what the Ed God does too, if God causally determines all things directly or indirectly, including all assumptions of false, or not assumptions, all affirmations of false beliefs. I mean, poor Greg Koukl. I'm not picking on Greg Koukl. When I say this, it's actually a compliment to him, because nobody thinks that his faculties are damaged, right? He's brilliant. But according to Bignon, it is poor Greg Koukl, because his cognitive faculties were seemingly working great. He even affirmed Calvinism, 5-point Calvinism, and everything was working great until God stepped in and causally determined poor Greg Koukl to start affirming false beliefs. Or saying, well, God just created Greg with a certain nature to at least get a lot of things right, but God created him with a nature that would affirm libertarian freedom, even though it's false. Well, again, poor Greg Koukl. But if this is the kind of God we got, how can Bignon assume that this kind of God isn't doing all this stuff to him? You got a major problem. So yeah, Bignon's got the same problems here.
All right, Bignon says, quote, but God's determining process isn't like that in the normal cases, but with those kind of worries, you would have a defeater on determinism only if you believed that God makes your faculties dysfunction a majority of the time.
All right, so we're talking about normal cases, what you believe, and a majority of the time. So, all right, so it seems that God just might, maybe I'm wrong. I do think that God causally determines some things, and perhaps God is causing and determining Bignon's faculties to dysfunction a majority of the time, at least when it comes to this issue. Moreover, that's basically what he's saying about Greg Koukl. But moreover, what we believe is irrelevant, because he talks about what we believe here. That's irrelevant. If God causes and determines all things all the time, no matter what different mechanisms he uses. And moreover, he brings up the majority of the time. Well, the majority of the time that he's talking about doesn't matter either, because obviously Bignon would affirm that most people who have ever existed and who exist today have at least some false views about God, if not really bad. They would affirm some horribly wrong false views about God. And he even believes that God causes and determines all of these affirmations of false beliefs about God. He even believes that God causes and determines his fellow elect Calvinists to affirm false theological beliefs. So with that in mind, Bignon is only left assuming that this God of deception, not a maximally great being, is causing and determining him to think correctly in this case. But on Ed, we are left with a version of God that's kind of similar to Loki in the Avengers. They refer to him as the God of mischief. Well, let me tell you something. I worship a maximally great being, not a God of mischief. And by the way, if God determines exactly what is proper and also determines all other things that are supposedly not proper, well, who's responsible for the so-called improper thinking and improper beliefs that follow? By the way, that's another rhetorical question, because the answer is obvious.
All right, Bignon says, in the normal cases, God doesn't interfere with the function of our faculties.
How does he know? Apparently, contra Bignon's assertion, God does this quite often. On his Ed view, God is the function of all cognitive faculties. In the normal cases, God causally determines all cognitive faculties to behave exactly as they behave. Those who always miss the point, as Bignon does here, are simply caused and determined, either directly or indirectly, by God to always miss the point. So it's simply not Bignon's fault when he continues to miss the point, at least if Ed is true. Fortunately, Ed is false.
All right, so Eli brings up the cousin to the free thinking argument, an argument you crafted to talk about what is essential for rational deliberation. So you refer to this as the deliberation and liberation argument.
Yeah, it rhymes, so it helps me to remember it. The deliberation and liberation. So yeah, it goes like this. Premise 1, rationality requires deliberation. 2, deliberation requires liberation. And by liberation, I mean libertarian freedom. 3, therefore, rationality requires liberation. 4, some humans are rational. 5, therefore, some humans possess a liberation. They possess libertarian freedom.
All right, so this argument hinges on the word deliberation. You quoted this earlier, so then let's just quote it again for those of you tuning in late. All right, so deliberation, Webster's dictionary defined it as to weigh in the mind, to consider and examine the reasons for and against a measure, to estimate the weight of force of arguments, or the probable consequences of a measure in order to a choice or decision, to pause and consider.
Yeah, so we did discuss that earlier in this video today, but let's quickly revisit it. After considering the definition of deliberation, is it possible to truly deliberate without libertarian freedom? No, it's not. Why? Because if exhaustive determinism is true, then, if we're talking about naturalism or divine determinism here, if exhaustive determinism is true, then either the non-rational laws of nature and past events, all things outside of human control determine everything about humanity, or God causally determines everything about humanity, right? Either the laws of nature or God always exhaustively cause and determine a person's considerations, right? How they consider something, how they examine something, how they make their estimations, all of one's thoughts about their beliefs and all of one's beliefs about their thoughts. If that's the case, then the person, in this case, the thing Bignon refers to as I, cannot rationally affirm or provide justification that his belief really is the best or true, including his belief that determinism is true. So with that in mind, it seems that libertarian freedom is necessary if one genuinely possesses the ability to rationally evaluate one's thoughts and beliefs and to deliberate in the truest sense. So it follows that if deliberation is impossible, then so is rationality. But if rationality is impossible, then any so-called knowledge gained via the process of rationality goes down the drain or out the window.
All right.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, that's a phrase that you use often, process of rationality. What does that mean?
Yeah, that's a good question. Basically, by the process of rationality, I'm referring to the steps a person, the thing one refers to as I, right? So the process of rationality, I'm referring to the steps a person takes while deciding what he or she ought to think is true, or what beliefs he or she ought to affirm, right? Those are the steps that I'm going to take. I'm going to do my due diligence. I'm going to do my homework. In fact, J. Warner Wallace was just on Frank Turek's podcast yesterday. And J. Warner Wallace did a great job of talking about, he discussed how people look at the exact same evidence and reach different conclusions, but oftentimes people are too heavily influenced by their greatest desires or their biases or emotions or whatever. He talks about, again, like Mike Licona does, steps you can take to free yourself from that so that you can infer the best explanation. But if exhaustive determinism is true, something other than the thinker, than the person, right, is doing that for them. A person is not deciding what steps they should take to ultimately decide what they should believe or what they ought to rationally affirm as true. If exhaustive divine determinism is true, one then cannot engage in this process of rationality. That is to say, one cannot decide what he ought to affirm as true if something else has caused and determined this affirmation. If it happens to be true or not is irrelevant.
All right, but Bignon responds to the deliberation and liberation argument and says, quote, once again, nothing in there calls for indeterminism. So I'm fine with that account of deliberation and is perfectly compatible with theistic determinism.
Yeah, I mean, he just doesn't get it. As I've clearly explained, how an exhaustive deterministic view fails here. As previously noted, I'll say it one more time. If something outside of Bignon's control causally determines Bignon to affirm a false belief, then it's impossible for Bignon to infer or affirm a better belief, let alone the truth. So moreover, if Bignon's considerations and examinations and estimations are caused and determined by something other than Bignon and something outside of Bignon's control, then Bignon is not in control of his deliberating. He's not doing the deliberating. He's not taking the steps. He's simply at the mercy of the causal deterministic force outside of his control. So bottom line, Bignon is wrong. As I said before, an agent on exhaustive divine determinism is nothing more than a bag of beliefs, none of which are up to the bag.
All right, Bignon said, quote, God is the one who designed our cognitive faculties to obtain knowledge.
I agree, and I affirm that much. But on EDD, God is also the one who designed them to affirm all the false beliefs humanity has ever possessed, including all of Bignon's false beliefs. So Bignon and Ed do not have logical access to the term proper function.
Bignon said, quote, if he means you need the categorical ability to think otherwise, then he's begging the question.
Yeah, that's false. It's not begging the question, since I've demonstrated this is the case. I've made these arguments, deductive arguments. I've defended the premises. I've referenced these arguments and reasons in the videos responding to part one, and pointed to my article entitled, for example, "FreeThinking Needs the PAP." Maybe Bignon missed it. He asserted that I must have missed some stuff in his book. Well, it seems that he's missed much of my work as well. But here's the bottom line. If something outside of Bignon's control, like God, causally determines Bignon to affirm a false belief, then it's impossible for Bignon to infer or affirm a better or true belief. That's the main point, and it's pretty simple.
All right, so Eli quotes you, quote, if we always choose according to our greatest desires all the time, then they are never aimed at truth. Bignon replied, this claim of his is obviously false from our choosing according to our greatest desires. It does not follow that they are never aimed at truth.
Well, okay, Bignon already affirmed Plantinga's EAAN, the evolutionary argument against naturalism. Based on that argument, it does not follow that some beliefs can't happen to hit the bullseye of truth accidentally, just because they happen to be aimed at survival. On Bignon's view of Ed, God also occasionally causes some true beliefs. But in the normal cases, God causally determines a plethora of false theological beliefs, even amongst Calvinists. On Ed, on EDD, our beliefs are not aimed at truth, nor are they primarily aimed at survival. On Ed, on exhaustive divine determinism, all of our beliefs are always aimed perfectly at the center of God's will. God's will, according to Bignon, is for most people, including Calvinists, to affirm false theological beliefs. Thus, on Ed, on exhaustive divine determinism, our belief-forming faculties are not reliable. In fact, I have an epistemologist, a professional epistemologist who's a professor at a great university who should be publishing an article soon on freethinkingministries.com about how belief-forming faculties are not reliable on any exhaustive deterministic view. So that should be out in the next week. Anyway, you think about this. On Bignon's Ed view, God is the one who is always doing the aiming, right? And our beliefs are always aimed at the center of God's will, and God's will is for the majority of humanity to affirm false beliefs. And if you think about those false beliefs that ultimately cause all the evil and suffering in the world, and ultimately send this conscious person who doesn't have control of what he thinks of or about, or how he thinks of it about it, but he's still conscious, right? Now, God determines what they're consciously believing, but not choosing. And then they're sent to hell because of these false beliefs that God causally determines them to affirm so that they can experience eternal conscious torment. I mean, I suppose Bignon will assert that God must have some good, morally sufficient reasons, right? That's his term, morally sufficient reasons. God must have these things even if he doesn't know what they are, right? I just don't think that's a good explanation at all. God has good reasons for causing and determining most humans to think incorrectly on these important matters so they can burn in the eternal fires of the Holocaust of hell into the infinite future. I don't know. Whatever the case might be, if exhaustive divine determinism describes reality, our belief-forming faculties are not reliable. So here's the bottom line. It's an assumption to affirm that his greatest desires are also aimed at truth, to then conclude his beliefs are in fact true. That seems to be the definition and the epitome of begging the question.
All right, Bignon said, quote, God gave us cognitive faculties that when they are functioning properly are tracking truth.
I agree, but this view combined with Ed fails. And this is why I've argued that proper function entails libertarian freedom to think, so you got to be a free thinker. Now, this raises another rhetorical question. When one's cognitive faculties are not functioning properly or tracking truth, who causally determined this to occur, if Ed is true on exhaustive divine determinism? And since the normal cases that Bignon refers to are a preponderance of false theological beliefs, why assume this God of deception is causing Bignon to affirm true theological beliefs as opposed to all those who have been caused and determined otherwise to disagree with him? Careful not to beg the question in response.
All right, Bignon said, quote, Tim Stratton said the how is irrelevant, but we see here that what is relevant for cognitive faculties is to be reliable is the how. I hope that was clear.
Yeah, he said, so say that part again.
Okay, so Bignon said, Tim Stratton said the how is irrelevant, okay? And then Bignon continues but we see here that what is relevant for cognitive faculties to be reliable is the how.
Right. And so again, I think Bignon misses the point. If EDD, exhaustive divine determinism is true, our cognitive faculties, once again, they're aimed at God's will, not truth. Mm-hmm. And they always hit a bullseye every single time. So God causally determines who will affirm false beliefs and even causally determines the elect Calvinists, because they don't all agree with each other on this stuff either. So God would causally determine the elect Calvinists to believe false and absurd propositions on his Ed view, on his metaphysics, right? So they share the same theology, but they have different metaphysics, and that's what this comes down to. So on Ed, our cognitive faculties are reliable, especially when it comes to affirming theological beliefs. So if you think about it, if God designs faculties to function in a manner of knowledge, then Ed, every time they do not deliver knowledge, that was caused and perfectly determined by God. And since the normal cases are a plethora and a preponderance of false theological beliefs, Bignon can only assume, that would be determined also, that God is causing and determining him to be in the minority of cases of people who hold true theological beliefs. But this assumption, like I said, is also causally determined by God if Ed is true, even if it's a bad assumption. So Bignon stands in no position then to evaluate his assumption because on his view, God causally determines his evaluative thoughts on top of everything else. So there is no escape. If God determines Bignon to happily affirm false theological beliefs, Bignon must happily affirm false theological beliefs. Think about that. If that's the case, I think most people can see the absurdity of such a view. If that's the case, EDD, exhaustive divine determinism, aka Ed, is simply absurd. And what's worse follows from the realization that Bignon is in the minority of Christians. And even some of his, like I said, his fellow elect Calvinists disagree with him on this score. So on his own Ed view, Bignon is utterly powerless to consider the views of those who disagree with him. He might feel like he's doing it, but that's illusory, for he is caused and determined to hold his views by God, no matter how good any argument is to the contrary.
All right, Bignon said, quote, "What you want is your beliefs to land at truth, no matter how you travel to them."
Well, that's not true. I mean, it's good to hold true beliefs. It's important. Yeah, you do want true beliefs, but if one travels to their true beliefs in an unreliable manner, then these beliefs, although true, they don't count as knowledge. And I encourage him to talk to J.P. Moreland. Dr. Moreland taught the first ever class I had on the campus of Biola. Fox, you weren't there for that one. Yeah, but in fact, it was J.P. Moreland. It was in a class. He taught it along with Dallas Willard and Scott Smith. The three of them kind of team taught this 3-day intense study. But I'll never forget Moreland, who first taught me about justified true belief. And he noted that if the how, Bignon brought up the how. Moreland said that if the how is not reliable, then one's true beliefs, even if you happen to hold a true belief, they're still not justified. And if knowledge requires justification, then you don't have knowledge. So, if knowledge requires justification and one has reached true beliefs unreliably, then one's true beliefs are not justified. You know, as Socrates would say, they're not tethered to reality. In fact,
I think I have a good illustration. So I teach math, and I could have two students that have the same exact answer, but I tell them I'm not grading your answer, I'm grading your solution. So, someone could have a whole page of work, and some of them could simply have guessed the right answer. One of them is justified because they did all the work. The other one guessed. Even though you have the right answer, you're not justified. Therefore, you fail.
So you're saying the how. Pardon me?
Is that a valid analogy? As far as
it seems to me that you're saying the how is vital.
Yes.
You're not saying who cares about the how as long as you got true beliefs. You're saying no, you're going to fail my class if that's the approach you take to the math class, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think the how is vital, especially if we're going to talk about reason-based knowledge or justified beliefs. So, ultimately on EDD, however, every belief is caused and determined directly or indirectly by God. Everything happens exactly the way God makes it happen. And since most people hold a preponderance of false theological beliefs, then the normal cases are not reliable on Bignon's ed view.
All right, so there's more here. I think it kind of retreads a lot of the same ground. So I think you said your piece, you made your case for the free thinking argument against naturalism. What do you think? Do you think you need to continue? Or you think you made your case?
Yeah, they kept going on. There's so much more I'd like to talk about, but and I did. I've already responded to it in that over 20,000 word response. But I think as for now, we're closing in on 2 hours. It's probably too long. So I think the free thinking argument against naturalism so far is still standing strong. And so, I think we can start to wrap it up.
All right.
If I haven't mentioned it yet, stay tuned for my book.
There it is again. I've run out of fingers and toes at this point. All right. So, do we have any time for questions? 1 or 2 for those who've stuck around?
I haven't been looking. If you've seen any that
anything good?
For some reason I can't. Okay, now I'm scrolling through. You know what? I'm seeing some great stuff. Just skimming. I think what you and I should do. Let's spend some good time with it. See what ones are worthy of response, and let's come back in the next week or 2 and do some videos interacting with some of these.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, because you know what? We didn't want to go over 2 hours. If we start responding to any of these questions, we're going to get 3 hours or 4 hours. So but we will. We're not ignoring questions. And when we do shows in the future, we'll make sure that we're taking questions live, because the point of this was to do a response. We did want questions for us to kind of put in the queue.
Now, Fox, I just got to pick on you really quickly.
Oh no!
You said you weren't going to be easy on me. I felt like, I mean, Bignon's already been tough on me, but I felt like, you were like, hey, get ready for a hardcore sparring session. I felt like you just kind of walked me through some of this stuff. So can we just expect you to be a little more New Yorkish in the future?
This was my first time. I just wanted to make sure that I could make it through 2 hours. So yes, I was nice, but I'm not going to be nice to you in the future. Maybe we'll have a grill a Molinist segment or something like that.
Right.
I grill you. But I promise I won't be nice next time, all right? I'm going to be a disagreeable New Yorker, exactly what you think I am.
I mean, you and I have had some great arguments in the past behind closed doors. So we'll just have to, get out in the public square and let people see us argue occasionally. We'll have some fun doing it.
I don't want to argue with you. I want to argue with atheists. All right. Anyway, any final thoughts before we sign off?
Yeah, let's wrap up. And I'll just say that, I hope I've been clear. Guillaume Bignon, as I've noted many times, is simply brilliant. In fact, in my opinion, nobody does a better job of defending a false view. He believes it's true. There's no doubt in my mind. He sincerely, truly believes his position is true. He's not a charlatan, right? This is, but this is why I regularly tell people who want to argue against Calvinism or compatibilism that they had better read Bignon's book. So for those of you listening out there, go buy his book and I'll be expecting the check.
Yeah, the royalty check.
Yeah. So with that said, Bignon's view of Calvinism combined with exhaustive divine determinism crumbles to the ground. I don't think he sees this. So with that said, I do think there's some room for his view on a Calvinistic view not combined with Ed. So here's my friendly advice for my frenemy, since he has referred to me as his frenemy in Rhode Island. He was telling me about his upcoming book. I was telling him about my upcoming dissertation, and he said, well, we will be frenemies. And I'm putting more of the emphasis on the friend part of frenemy, and I hope he does too. I don't know if he feels the same way. I would love to, even if he wants to give me a call, I'd love to have a chat with him. Love to have another lunch with him. But here's my friendly advice for my frenemy. As they would say in Frozen, let it go, let it go. Oh. All right, sorry for the dad joke. But here's what you got to let go. Let Ed go. Let Ed go. Keep exhaustive divine predestination, as I do. You can keep it. You should keep it. That's biblical. And feel free to keep your 5-point tulip Calvinism if you'd like. I encourage you to do it. But drop Ed. Let Ed go in favor of rational responsibility. Join me, and together we can rule the galaxy as French philosopher and an American theologian. I'm sorry. Look, 40 years ago, that was said today. So. Yeah,
when we're all there, I promise I'm going to talk to him about his jokes. That's my job from now on, dude. All right.
I had to bring in Darth Vader. Come on. But no, seriously, I think he should join me. Affirm exhaustive divine predestination. Look, I reject Ed, I reject EDD, but I affirm EDP. And he should do the same. I think we'd make a great team. After all, this is what I got to say about Guillaume Bignon. I think Guillaume Bignon has what it takes to be a game changer.
All right. Well, hey, thanks to everybody who joined us. We're actually under 2 minutes. Under 2 hours. So we did it. Thanks to everybody who joined us. We plan on doing more of these live shows. So make sure you're following us on the socials, Facebook, subscribe to the FreeThinking Ministries YouTube channel, subscribe, all that good stuff. And please consider supporting us financially so we can keep making this happen. So we can continue helping free thinkers take their thoughts captive to obey Christ. How do you think I did today, Tim? Did I do all right?
Man, for being a rookie on YouTube, you did great. I'm pretty new to this myself, but man, you're killing it already. I can't wait to see what you do as you start to get a little more comfortable.
And I'm going to roast you. You got my word, free thinklings. I'm going to roast you.
Look forward to it, man.
All right. Take care, all.